A silent rider buys a mother and child, unaware that she would heal his heart. I ain't saying nothin'. Just don't send me back. The wind tore through the barren plain, dry and merciless. It whipped dust into a pale, swirling dance across the endless, flat expanse that was John's world. His homestead lay like a forgotten promise, a single, sturdy cabin made of rough-hewn logs, weathered by countless seasons of biting wind and dust-laden sun. Inside, the silence was a living thing, broken only by the creak of floorboards under his heavy boots or the soft clinking of metal on tin as he prepared his solitary meals. John moved with a deliberate, quiet efficiency, his broad-shouldered frame showing years of honest labor and enduring hardship. His hands, massive and calloused, performed each task with a practiced rhythm, chopping wood deep into the night, as if splitting his own guilt into pieces. He was a man carved from the land itself, solid, heavy, unyielding. But his eyes, deep-set and tired, held the quiet sorrow of a life lived alone, a life that had seen too much, taken too much. A grave lay on the lonely hill behind his cabin, a constant, silent testament to the loss that had driven him into this reclusive existence. He lived, but he did not feel. Numbness had become his most reliable companion, a thick hide against the sharp edges of memory. The world outside his fence line was a place of indifferent cruelty, and he had no desire to engage with it. He simply endured, from one slate evening sky to the next, waiting for nothing. The town was a cluster of leaning shacks and a single rickety saloon, a testament to desperation in the vastness. John rarely ventured there, only when supplies were critically low. This bitter morning, as the frosty air stung his skin, he drove his wagon into the dusty main street, the squeal of the wheels echoing the desolation. A small crowd had gathered, their voices harsh, their faces hard. John saw her then, standing slight and unmoving amidst the jeers. Her coat was thin, inadequate against the cold, and she held a child, a small boy, tucked tightly into her side. Her face, though smudged with dirt and streaked with tears, held a fierce, quiet dignity. She appeared broken, yes, but not shattered. Her eyes, wide and alert, darted from face to face, not begging, but calculating, protecting. The man speaking, a fleshy, sneering individual named Silas Thorne, the town's de facto patriarch and a man known for his avarice, gesticulated wildly. Another mouth to feed, eh? What's a woman like that worth without a man? Maybe a few years of honest work? Eh? His words were slurred, a cruel offer hanging in the air like a putrid scent. John's jaw tightened. A memory, sharp as a shard of ice, pierced the numbness he had cultivated so carefully. He saw another face, another child, lost to a harsh world he couldn't control. His own failure, his deepest guilt, flared. He saw the woman shiver, not just from the cold, but from humiliation, from fear. The child whimpered. John's gaze settled on her worn shoes, then on her trembling hands clutching the boy. An unfamiliar feeling, hot and urgent, surged through his chest. He took a heavy step forward, his shadow falling over the mocking faces. "How much?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, unexpected, cutting through the jeers. Silence fell, sudden and heavy. Thorne squinted, surprised. For what? The woman? The brat? John's gaze was steady, unwavering. For her. And the child, his hand went to his worn leather pouch, drawing out a handful of coins. "She's with me?" he added, the words feeling foreign on his tongue, a declaration against his nature. The crowd murmured, then dispersed. She stayed. The ride back to the homestead was silent, stretched thin by unspoken questions. Sarah, her name given briefly, reluctantly, sat rigidly beside him on the wagon seat. The child, a boy named Caleb, asleep in her lap. She clutched the small bundle tightly, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, a silhouette of distrust against the vast, empty sky. John offered no explanations, no reassurances. He was not a man of words. He drove, his gaze straight ahead, the wind stinging his skin, mirroring the faint unease in his chest. What had he done? This impulsive act, so unlike his carefully constructed solitude, now felt heavy, a burden he hadn't anticipated. He had bought her, but he did not own her. He felt a different weight, a responsibility. Once they arrived, he simply gestured to the cabin. "There's a cot." Fires lit, then he turned away, retreating to the small barn, the soft nicker of his horse a familiar comfort. Sarah watched him go, her expression unreadable. She stepped down from the wagon, her weary shoulders rigid, and guided Caleb inside. The cabin, though small, was clean, stark. A single pale winter sunbeam cut through the dusty vastness of the main room. She found the cot he mentioned, a rough wooden frame with a thin mattress.
No blanket.
She shivered, but the stove was indeed lit, a faint warmth radiating into the cold space. She stood for a long moment, listening to the silence of the wilderness, a silence different from the one in town, less hostile, but equally vast. She moved carefully, settling Caleb onto the cot, covering him with her own threadbare shawl. There was no welcome here, no offer of comfort, only a stark, undeniable presence. She understood. They were two broken things, sharing a space, each guarding their own wounds, in a routine governed by the land's unforgiving rhythm. He watched her from the periphery of his vision, a ghost in his quiet world. She moved with a quiet dignity, her presence unobtrusive. She kept the cabin meticulously clean, swept the floor, boiled water over the stove, tended to the small boy with a tenderness that surprised him. He noticed her worn shoes, the thin soles scuffed from endless walking. He saw the boy shiver sometimes, despite the fire. John said nothing. His communication was always through action, never words. One morning, she found a thick, wool blanket folded neatly on the foot of the cot, soft and heavy. It had not been there the night before. Another day, a new tin cup, gleaming faintly, sat by the water barrel. A small sack of dried apples, sweet and fragrant, appeared on the rough wooden table. He would leave them when she and Caleb were outside, perhaps collecting firewood or watching the horizon. He never saw her pick them up, never saw her expression change, but he knew she noticed. She never spoke of them. The silence was their language. Her suspicion, though still present, softened around the edges, like ice melting under a persistent sun. She would glance at him sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, a brief, hesitant flicker of curiosity in her tired eyes. He would be chopping wood, his back to the cabin, the rhythmic thud of the axe on timber splitting the quiet, but he felt her gaze, a faint warmth on his skin. He never turned, never acknowledged it. He continued his work, reliable and deliberate. She began to leave things for him too. A hot cup of coffee by the barn door in the early morning, a freshly mended tear in his work shirt. Small, quiet gestures, forming a fragile, unspoken bridge between their two silent worlds, a slow, unsteady growth of something new. Then the storm descended, sudden and violent. The biting wind howled like a distant beast, rattling the wooden door, clawing at the cabin walls. Snow, thick and blinding, lashed against the windows, quickly burying the world outside in a blanket of white. Caleb, the small boy, began to cough, a dry, rasping sound that quickly worsened. His small body burned with fever, his breathing shallow. Sarah moved with a frantic urgency, her quiet strength now tested by fear. She pressed cool cloths to his forehead, murmured soft words, but the fever held fast. John, returning from securing the livestock, found them. He froze, his gaze sweeping over the scene, the trembling mother, the flushed, struggling child. His own heart, so long numb, gave a raw, suppressed tremor. He remembered another child, small and fragile, succumbing to the cold. He would not let it happen again. He took command with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. He built the fire high in the stove, feeding it logs until the small cabin hummed with warmth. He heated water, mixed a bitter herbal concoction from his own meager supplies, and gently, firmly, helped Sarah administer it to the boy. He sat by the cot, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he checked Caleb's forehead, his breathing soft. Sarah watched him, her usual guard dissolving in the face of shared vulnerability. She saw not the silent stranger, but a man who cared, whose solid presence felt like an anchor in the storm. For the first time, she truly looked at his weathered face, the lines etched by sun and sorrow, and saw beyond the stoicism. He stayed awake through the long night, a silent sentinel, his presence a comfort she hadn't known she needed. When the first hint of pale dawn broke through the snow-laden sky, Caleb's fever finally broke. Sarah looked at John, her eyes brimming with a gratitude too profound for words. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture, acknowledging their shared ordeal. Something had broken open between them. The relative peace of the homestead was shattered by the arrival of Silas Thorne and a few rough men, their faces grim, their intent clear. Word had spread, distorted and malicious, about John's arrangement with Sarah. Thorne, emboldened by gossip and his own greed, had come to reclaim what he believed was his due, to shame Sarah publicly, to assert his twisted dominion. He stood outside the cabin, his voice loud and mocking, rattling the wooden door. "Heard you got yourself a kept woman, Ryder? This ain't no proper marriage. That woman's a wanderer, a loose end. I'm here to take what's mine." Sarah, inside, flinched. She clutched Caleb tightly, her face paling, her breath held. The child instinctively pressed closer, sensing the danger. She lowered her gaze, her dignity trying to shield her from the verbal assault. She had endured such humiliation before. It was a familiar, bitter taste. But this time it was different. This was their home, however fragile, however new. John stepped forward from the cabin door, his figure solid and imposing against the swirling dust. His face was a mask of granite, his eyes fixed on Thorne. He said nothing, but his presence was a clear, unyielding challenge. Thorne faltered for a moment, then recovered, sneering. "What's the matter, Ryder? Can't speak for your woman? Or is she too ashamed to show her face?" The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. John took another slow, deliberate step, closing the distance between them. His silence was not weakness. It was a prelude. His voice, when it came, was low, resonant, and filled with an earth-shaking finality. "She's with me," he stated, his gaze unblinking. His eyes, usually tired, now held a dangerous glint. "Not bought." Chosen, the words hung in the air. A public declaration, a severing of old ties, a profound commitment. Thorne's sneer faded, replaced by a flicker of fear. He saw the unwavering resolve in John's eyes, the strength in his broad-shouldered stance. The other men shifted uneasily. The accusation had been met with an unyielding truth. Thorne, defeated by the sheer weight of John's presence, mumbled something under his breath, then turned and stomped away, his cronies following, leaving only the dust and the vast silence behind. Sarah, watching from the doorway, her shoulders trembling, allowed a single tear to fall. He stayed. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast long, comforting shadows across the yard. The air, cleared by the earlier confrontation, felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. John turned, his gaze meeting Sarah's. There was no longer suspicion in her eyes, only a profound relief, and something new, a burgeoning trust, a silent question. He didn't offer a smile, nor did he speak, but the slight softening around his mouth, the almost imperceptible nod of his head, conveyed more than any words. He had stood for her, protected her, claimed her in the most fundamental way. She felt a deep, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. It was not love yet, not in the way of songs and poems, but something far more solid. A shared foundation, a promise forged in fire and dust. From that day, their lives began to intertwine more deeply, more naturally. The parallel routines began to merge. They worked the land together, him with the heavy plowing, her with the meticulous planting of a small kitchen garden. She brought out fresh water for him, cool and clear, as he toiled under the dusty sun. He repaired a loose hinge on the wooden door, without being asked, a quiet gesture of care for their shared space. The small sounds of Caleb's play, now more joyful, filled the cabin, a gentle counterpoint to their silence. One evening, as the slate evening sky turned from purple to deep indigo, they sat on the porch, the biting wind now a soft whisper through the dry grass. She spoke first, her voice soft, a little unsteady, telling him of her journey, of the harsh life she had endured, the losses she had suffered. She did not ask for pity, only for understanding. He listened, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. No words, or just a steady, deliberate nod now and then. Then, when she fell silent, he spoke, his voice rough but even. He told her of the grave on the hill, of his own past, of the wife and child he had lost, of the guilt that had driven him to this desolate place. Her hand, hesitant at first, then firm, touched his arm. A simple gesture. No words were needed. They were no longer alone in their grief. The homestead, once a stark monument to isolation, gradually transformed. Under their combined, quiet diligence, it began to thrive. The fields yielded more abundantly. The small kitchen garden burst with life, vibrant greens against the dusty earth. The cabin, once so spare, gained warmth and character. Sarah, with her quiet strength and innate sense of home, added small, tender touches, a dried wildflower tucked into a tin cup, a neatly mended quilt spread over the bed. Caleb, now bolder, his laughter echoing through the small space, played freely in the yard, chasing imaginary foes among the tall grasses. Winter passed, the cracking ice on the frozen pond giving way to flowing water, the deep fog lifting to reveal clear, spring skies. The land itself seemed softer, responding to their care. Their bond deepened, growing with the silent rhythm of their days. There were no grand declarations, no passionate embraces. Their connection was woven into the fabric of their shared lives. A shared glance over the dinner table, a quiet understanding that passed between them when a task needed doing, a shared sigh of contentment as they watched the sun dip below the horizon. John, once so rigidly bound by his past, found himself looking forward, small, steady steps into an unknown future. The numb ache in his chest had receded, replaced by a quiet, steady beat. He still moved with deliberation, still spoke few words, but the weariness in his eyes had lessened, replaced by a subtle light. He was no longer just enduring, he was living, truly living, for the first time in years. Sarah, too, felt the slow, steady healing of her own wounds. She had found not just shelter, but a partner, a man whose silence was not absence, but presence, a deep, reliable well of strength. They were strong together. From dust and silence grew a home. From closed hearts, a family. Love is not always found in grand pronouncements or dramatic gestures. It grows quietly, like a stubborn seed pushing through hard earth. It is forged in shared endurance, in the small, anonymous mercies, in the steadfast presence that asks nothing and gives everything. It is found where no one looks, in the forgotten corners of a harsh world, blooming unexpectedly in the desolate vastness. It speaks not with a shout, but with a whisper, with a touch, with an unshakable gaze. This kind of love doesn't demand. It simply exists, nourishing, comforting, building. It reminds us that even in the deepest silence, connection can bloom, transforming barren landscapes into places of warmth and belonging. It is the quiet courage to open a closed heart, to trust again, to find solace in the steadfast rhythm of another's presence. John sat on the small porch, his massive hands carefully, meticulously shaping a piece of wood. The rhythmic rasp of his carving tool on the timber was a soft, contented sound. It was a rocker, a small one, for Caleb, a symbol of permanence, of a future he now dared to envision. The wind, once a bitter companion, now whispered gently through the dry grass, carrying the scent of damp earth and new life. The cabin door stood open, inviting in the fresh air, a stark contrast to the closed-off world he had once inhabited. Inside, Sarah hummed softly as she folded laundry, the domestic sounds weaving seamlessly with the quiet hum of the afternoon. Caleb, tired from his play, was curled up on the new blanket she had placed on the cot, asleep. John looked up, his gaze sweeping over the thriving homestead, over the woman who had brought light back into his desolate world. He looked at her, truly saw her, not as a burden, not as a rescue, but as the quiet anchor of his life. His voice, still rough, still deliberate, broke the soft silence, carrying across the small yard, clear and unwavering. Stay here. It was not a question, not a plea, but a statement of undeniable truth, an offering of permanence and belonging. Sarah paused, her hands still. She looked at him, her eyes soft, a gentle smile gracing her lips. She stayed. If the story touched you, like warm light in a cold night, then carry it with you. Subscribe to our channel for more stories full of silence, courage, and genuine closeness. And tell us what moved you the most. We'll see you again, where silence means home.